The coat check room at Luciano's was barely large enough to turn around in, a converted storage closet tucked beneath the main staircase of the upscale Italian restaurant where San Francisco's elite came to see and be seen. Isabelle Gray had been working there for 4 months now, taking coats and umbrellas from patrons who never looked at her face, handing back claim tickets with practiced efficiency, existing in the carefully maintained invisibility that service workers learned to cultivate. It was exactly what she needed. The small space smelled like expensive wool and designer perfume, and the faint mustiness that accumulated in places where hundreds of coats cycled through on damp San Francisco nights. Isabelle had arranged it meticulously. Hangers organized by number, a small stepladder for reaching the highest rack, a discreet tip jar that collected surprising amounts from guilty patrons who'd kept her waiting while they lingered over dessert and after-dinner drinks. She worked Tuesday through Saturday 6 p.m. to midnight, the dinner shift that brought in the biggest tips and required the least interaction. The restaurant's owner, a second-generation Italian immigrant named Paolo, had hired her without asking too many questions, accepting her explanation that she'd recently moved to the city and needed work that didn't require extensive background checks or references. Paolo had simply nodded, shown her the coat check system, and told her that discretion was the most important quality in anyone who worked at Luciano's. "Our guests value their privacy," he'd said in his heavily accented English. "You see nothing, you hear nothing, you remember nothing, capisce?" Isabelle had understood perfectly. She'd been practicing exactly that skill for the past 18 months, ever since she'd walked away from her life in Boston and everything that had come with it. Tonight was busy, a Friday evening in late October when the fog rolled thick off the bay and everyone who arrived needed their coats checked. Isabelle worked steadily, taking garments and issuing tickets, making small talk when required, but mostly maintaining the pleasant blankness that made her forgettable. She was hanging up a cashmere overcoat, probably worth more than she made in a month, when she heard Paolo's voice from the restaurant's entrance, speaking in rapid Italian to someone she couldn't see. The tone was deferential, almost nervous, which was unusual. Paolo was normally unflappable, treating all his guests with the same courteous professionalism regardless of their status or demands. Then a man stepped into view, and Isabelle understood Paolo's nervousness immediately. He was tall, perhaps in his late 40s, with silver threading through dark hair and a face that belonged on Roman coins, all strong lines and aristocratic angles. He wore a navy suit that had clearly been custom-tailored, and he moved with the kind of controlled grace that suggested violence lived somewhere beneath the civilized surface. 2 other men flanked him, both built like walls, their eyes constantly scanning the restaurant's entrance and main dining room. Security. Serious security. Isabelle shrank back slightly into her coat check alcove, instinctively trying to make herself smaller, less noticeable. She'd gotten good at reading dangerous men over the past few years, at recognizing the ones whose power came with consequences for anyone who crossed them. This man was dangerous. She could see it in the way Paolo bowed slightly as he spoke, in the way the hostess had straightened her posture and smoothed her dress, in the way the 2 security men positioned themselves to control sightlines and access points. Paolo was leading the group toward the private dining room in the back. Luciano's had 3 of them, reserved for guests who wanted to conduct business away from public view. When the tall man stopped suddenly, his attention caught by something. He was looking at Isabelle. She froze, her hand still on the coat she'd been hanging, her heart rate accelerating with irrational fear. There was no reason for him to notice her. She was just the coat check girl, practically part of the furniture, as invisible as the wall sconces and the carpet runner. But he was staring at her with an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness, his dark eyes studying her face as if he recognized her, as if she'd triggered some memory he couldn't quite place. Then he said something in Italian to Paolo, too quiet for Isabelle to hear, and continued toward the private dining room, his security detail following. Isabelle exhaled slowly, trying to calm the adrenaline spike that had flooded her system. It was nothing. He'd simply noticed her, probably because she'd been standing there like a deer in headlights instead of maintaining her usual professional demeanor. It meant nothing, but her hands were shaking as she finished hanging the coat. The evening continued normally for the next 2 hours. Isabelle checked coats, handed out claim tickets, made polite conversation with the few guests who bothered to acknowledge her existence. She tried not to think about the man in the private dining room, tried not to wonder who he was or why Paolo had been so nervous around him. She was processing a particularly complicated retrieval, a family of 6 who'd somehow mixed up their claim tickets and couldn't remember which coat belonged to whom, when one of the security men from earlier appeared at the coat check window. Isabelle Gray? His voice was flat, professional, carrying no emotion. Isabel's stomach dropped. Yes? Mr. Caruso would like to speak with you, when you have a moment. It wasn't phrased as a request. I'm working, Isabelle said, hearing the tremor in her own voice. I can't just leave the coat check unattended. Paolo will cover for you. Mr. Caruso was very clear. He wants to speak with you now. Isabelle looked past the security man to where Paolo stood near the hostess station, watching the exchange with an expression that might have been sympathy or might have been resignation. He nodded once, a gesture that seemed to say she had no choice in this matter. Okay, Isabelle said quietly. Just let me. Now, Miss Gray. She followed the security man through the restaurant's main dining room, hyper-aware of the eyes that tracked their movement, of the conversations that paused as they passed. The coat check girl being summoned by someone important enough to warrant private security was unusual enough to draw attention, even in a place where discretion was supposedly valued. The private dining room was at the end of a short hallway, behind a heavy door that the security man opened for her before stepping back. Isabelle hesitated on the threshold, every instinct screaming at her to run, to refuse, to do anything except walk into that room and face whatever waited for her inside. But running would only make things worse. Whatever this was, she needed to confront it directly. She stepped inside. The room was elegant, dark wood paneling, a table set for 8, though only one man sat there now, candles casting warm light that created pools of shadow in the corners. The tall man from earlier, Mr. Caruso, apparently sat at the head of the table, a glass of red wine in his hand. His attention focused entirely on Isabelle as she entered. Close the door, please, he said quietly. Isabelle did, the soft click seeming unnaturally loud in the intimate space. Sit, Caruso gestured to the chair nearest him. I'd rather stand. Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. You're frightened, I can see it, but I'm not going to hurt you, Isabelle. I simply want to talk. About what? Isabelle kept her voice level despite her racing heart. I'm just the coat check girl. I don't know why you'd want to talk to me. Don't you? Run. Caruso took a sip of his wine, studying her over the rim of the glass. Look at me carefully, Isabelle. Do you recognize me? She did look, forcing herself to meet his eyes, to study his features despite her fear. And yes, there was something familiar about him, something that tugged at memories she'd spent years trying to bury. The shape of his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners, something in his bearing that reminded her of... No. I don't know you, Isabelle said, but her voice wavered. Archurge. My name is Niccolo Caruso. Does that mean anything to you? It did. God help her, it did. No. But she couldn't admit that, couldn't let him see recognition in her face. Should it? Times. Niccolo set down his wine glass and leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving her face. You're very good at hiding, I'll give you that. 4 months you've been working here, and I've been coming to Luciano's twice a week for meetings. I never noticed you, never saw your face. But tonight something made me look, and when I did... He trailed off, and the silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken implications. You look exactly like her, Niccolo said finally. Exactly like my sister looked when she was your age. Which is impossible, because my sister died 23 years ago. Isabelle felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. She gripped the back of the chair she'd refused to sit in, needing something solid to anchor herself. I don't know what you're talking about, she whispered. Yes, you do. Niccolo's voice was gentle but implacable. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Because you're not just some random coat check girl who happens to look like my dead sister. You're connected to her somehow. And I want to know how. Isabelle's mind raced through options, through possible explanations and denials and escape routes. But she was trapped in this room with a man who had security outside the door, with someone who'd somehow recognized her despite all her efforts to remain invisible. I'm going to ask you 3 questions, Niccolo said, and I'm going to know if you lie to me, so I suggest you tell the truth, even if it's difficult. He paused, letting that sink in. First question, what was my sister's name? Isabelle closed her eyes. She could refuse to answer. She could maintain her denial. But something in Niccolò's voice, in the grief she could hear beneath his controlled exterior, made her realize that lying would only make this worse. Francesca, she said quietly. Her name was Francesca Maria Caruso. She heard Niccolò's sharp intake of breath, the sound of his glass being set down too hard on the table. Second question, he said, and there was something raw in his voice now. How did she die? She didn't. Isabelle opened her eyes and looked at him directly. She didn't die. She ran away. And she made everyone believe she was dead because staying alive and visible would have gotten her killed. Niccolò stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides, stopping so close that Isabelle had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. Third question, he said, and his voice was barely audible. Who are you? Isabelle took a deep breath, knowing that what she was about to say would change everything, would destroy the carefully constructed invisibility she'd spent 18 months building. My name is Isabelle Gray, but before that I was Isabelle Romano, and before that, she paused, meeting his eyes, I was Isabella Caruso, Francesca's daughter, your niece. The words hung in the air between them like smoke, impossible to take back, transforming everything with their utterance. Niccolò stared at her, his face cycling through emotions too quickly for Isabelle to track. Shock, disbelief, grief, hope, anger. Then, moving with careful deliberation, he reached out and touched her face, his fingers gentle against her cheek, as if he needed physical confirmation that she was real. My niece, he said, testing the words. Francesca's daughter, you're telling me my sister is alive? That she's been alive all these years? Was alive, Isabelle corrected quietly. She died 18 months ago, cancer. By the time they found it, it was already too late. She watched Niccolò absorb this information, saw the way grief settled over his features like a mask. He stepped back, turned away from her, his hand moving to his face in a gesture that might have been wiping away tears. I'll tell. Tell me, he said roughly. Tell me everything. How she survived. Where she's been. Why she never came home. Why she never told me she was alive. Isabelle looked at this man. Her uncle, though she'd never known him, had only heard about him in her mother's careful stories, and recognized the same grief she'd been carrying since her mother's death. The same desperate need for answers, for understanding, for some explanation that would make sense of loss that felt senseless. It's a long story, she said. Then sit down, Niccolò gestured to the chair again, and start from the beginning. This time, Isabelle sat. Niccolò Caruso poured her a glass of wine while Isabelle gathered her thoughts, trying to figure out how to explain 23 years of carefully guarded secrets to a man who'd thought his sister was dead. He'd settled back in his own chair, his posture outwardly relaxed, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped his wine glass too tightly. My mother, Francesca, she never told me everything, Isabelle began. She said it was safer that way, that the less I knew about her past, the less danger I'd be in if anyone ever found us. But I know enough. I know she grew up in the family business. I know she was supposed to marry someone your father had chosen for her, someone who would strengthen alliances and consolidate power, and I know she couldn't go through with it. Antonio Marchetti, Niccolò said quietly. That was who our father wanted her to marry. I was 17 when it was arranged. Francesca was 22. She tried to convince our father to call it off, but he wouldn't listen. He said family duty came before personal happiness. Isabelle nodded. She told me that part. She said, she tried everything, arguing, pleading, even threatening to embarrass the family publicly if he forced her. But nothing worked. So she did the only thing she could think of. She disappeared. The car accident, Niccolò said. On Highway 1, between here and Monterey, they found her car at the bottom of a cliff, burned so badly that... He stopped, his voice catching. There wasn't enough left to identify conclusively, but it was her car, her belongings. The police ruled it an accident. Our father, he never recovered from losing her. Isabelle felt a sharp stab of something that might have been guilt or might have been anger. Her grandfather, a man she'd never met, had grieved for the daughter he'd tried to force into an unwanted marriage. The irony was almost cruel. She staged it, Isabelle said. She had help from someone. She never told me who, but I think it was someone in law enforcement, someone who owed her a favor. They found a Jane Doe, a woman about the right age and build, who died in a different accident. They put her in my mother's car and sent it over the cliff. And while everyone was searching the wreckage and identifying the body, Francesca walked away. To where? Boston, initially, then Providence, then Portland, Maine. She moved every few years, changed her name each time, always staying on the East Coast where your family's influence was weaker. She worked as a waitress, a hotel clerk, a bookkeeper. She kept her head down and built a quiet life where no one would ever connect her to the Caruso family. Nicola was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. And you? When were you born? A year after she disappeared. She'd been dating someone before the engagement was arranged. She never told me his name, just that he was someone inappropriate, someone your father would never have approved of. When she realized she was pregnant, it made leaving even more urgent. She couldn't have a child out of wedlock while still part of your world. The scandal would have destroyed the family's reputation. So she let us all believe she was dead, and she went off to raise you alone. There was something in Nicolo's voice, not quite accusation, but something close to it. She was 23 years old, Isabelle said, hearing her own defensiveness. She was pregnant, terrified, and trapped in a situation where her only choices were to marry a man she didn't love or disappear entirely. She made the choice that gave her daughter a chance at a normal life. A normal life? Nicolo's laugh was bitter. Is that what you had? Moving every few years, never able to form lasting connections, always looking over your shoulder in case someone from your mother's past found you? Isabelle flinched, because he was right. It hadn't been normal. It had been lonely and rootless, and filled with her mother's barely suppressed fear that someday, somehow, the truth would catch up with them. It was better than the alternative, she said quietly. Nicolo studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. Perhaps it was. Tell me about her. What was she like? Was she happy? Down. The question was so unexpected, so genuinely yearning, that Isabelle felt tears prick at her eyes. She was careful. Always. She never relaxed completely, never let down her guard entirely. But yes, I think she was happy. In her way. She loved books. She would have loved to finish college, get a degree in literature, but that wasn't possible with her circumstances. She loved cooking Italian food even though it reminded her of home. She loved me. Isabelle's voice cracked slightly. She loved me so much that she gave up everything to keep me safe. How did she die? Pancreatic cancer. She felt sick for months, but wouldn't go to the doctor. She was afraid of appearing in medical databases, afraid someone would trace her through health insurance claims. By the time the pain got so bad she couldn't ignore it, the cancer had already spread everywhere. She died 6 weeks after the diagnosis. Isabelle watched Nicolo absorb this, saw the way his jaw tightened, the way his eyes went distant with grief for a sister he'd already mourned once, and now had to mourn again, this time with the additional knowledge that she'd been alive all these years, just beyond reach. And after she died, Nicolo asked, why did you come to San Francisco? Why come to the one place where you'd be most likely to be recognized? Because I had nowhere else to go. Isabelle's voice was flat, stating facts. My mother never put down roots anywhere. We had no extended family. She'd cut all ties. I had no support system, no savings to speak of. And I thought, San Francisco is a big city. Hundreds of thousands of people. I could disappear here just as easily as anywhere else. And maybe, in some way, I wanted to be close to where she'd come from. To understand the world she'd run from. So you took a job checking coats at a restaurant owned by one of my associates. Nicolo's voice held irony. Where I've been eating twice a week for the past 3 years. I didn't know that when I took the job. Paolo never mentioned you. And I've been very good at being invisible. Until tonight. Until tonight, Isabelle agreed. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of revelation settling between them. Isabelle could hear the distant sounds of the restaurant beyond the closed door. Conversation and laughter, and the clink of silverware on china. Normal sounds from a normal world that felt impossibly far away from this room and this conversation. What happens now? Isabelle asked finally, voicing the question that had been building since Niccolo had first recognized her. Are you going to tell people? Make my existence public? Niccolo looked at her sharply. Is that what you think? That I'd expose you to danger just to satisfy family pride or prove my sister had a daughter? I don't know what to think. I don't know you. No, you don't. Niccolo leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his attention focused entirely on her. But I knew your mother. And I know she wouldn't have gone to such extreme lengths to protect you unless the danger was real. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to quit your job at Luciano's, effective immediately. You're going to move somewhere more secure, somewhere I can ensure your safety. And you're going to let me protect you the way I should have been protecting you for the past 26 years. No, the refusal was automatic, instinctive. I don't need protection. I just need to be left alone. That's no longer an option. Niccolo's voice was gentle but firm. The moment I recognized you, the moment we had this conversation, your anonymity ended. My security team saw me pull you aside. Paolo saw it. Other diners saw it. People will be curious. They'll ask questions. And eventually, someone will put together enough pieces to figure out who you really are. Isabelle felt cold dread settling in her stomach. So because you recognized me, because you couldn't just let me stay invisible, now I have to accept your protection? Yes, Niccolo didn't apologize, didn't soften the truth. I know it's not fair. I know it's not what you want. But it's necessary. The world I operate in, the world your mother ran from, doesn't forgive loose ends or unanswered questions. The only way to keep you safe now is to bring you under my protection officially. Like my mother was under your father's protection? Well, Isabelle couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. Look how well that worked out for her. Niccolo's face tightened. I'm not my father. I don't force people into marriages they don't want. I don't value power over family. I've spent the past 20 years trying to transform what he built into something that operates on different principles. But it's still the same world. Still dangerous. Still full of people who solve problems with violence. Yes, Niccolo said simply, it is, which is exactly why you need protection from someone who understands that world and can navigate it. Me. Isabelle wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she could handle herself, that she'd been managing just fine for 18 months on her own. But she was also intelligent enough to recognize truth when she heard it. Niccolo was right. Her invisibility had ended the moment he'd recognized her, and navigating the dangerous world of organized crime wasn't something she could do alone, no matter how carefully she tried to stay hidden. What would this protection look like? She asked reluctantly. You'd move into one of my properties. I own a building in Pacific Heights with several secure apartments. You'd have your own space, your own privacy, but there would be security, and you'd need to coordinate your movements with my team. You'd also need to be cautious about your employment. Working public-facing jobs where anyone can see you is no longer safe. So I'd be a prisoner, just in a nicer cage than the coat check closet. You'd be alive, Niccolo said bluntly, and you'd have family, me, a connection to your mother's history, to the people and culture she came from. That's not nothing, Isabelle. Family. A word hung in the air between them, weighted with complex implications. Isabelle had spent her entire life with only her mother, the two of them against the world. The idea of having an uncle, of being connected to a larger network of relationships, was both appealing and terrifying. I need to think about it, she said. You have until tomorrow morning. Then I'm assigning security to you whether you've agreed to move or not. I'm not giving anyone the opportunity to hurt you because I failed to act quickly enough. It wasn't exactly a choice, Isabelle realized. It was an ultimatum delivered gently, but an ultimatum nonetheless. Accept his protection on his terms, or have it imposed on her anyway. She stood, suddenly desperate to leave this room in the intensity of Niccolo's attention. I should get back to work. Paolo's already closed the coat check for the night. He'll pay you for the full shift. Niccolo stood as well, reaching into his jacket and pulling out a business card. This is my private number. Call me when you've made your decision. Isabelle took the card reluctantly, feeling the weight of heavy cardstock. The embossed lettering that announced Niccolo Caruso, Private Holdings. And if I decide to run instead, disappear the way my mother did? Then I'll find you, and I'll bring you back. Because you're my family, Isabella. My sister's daughter. And I don't lose family twice. His voice softened slightly. Give me a chance to be the uncle your mother never let me be. Let me protect you the way I would have protected her, if I'd known she was alive. Isabelle looked at this man, her uncle, her mother's brother, a stranger who somehow felt familiar, and saw the grief and hope and determination in his face. She saw someone who'd lost his sister 23 years ago, and had just been given the miraculous gift of discovering that piece of her survived in Isabelle. I'll call you tomorrow, she said quietly. Niccolo nodded and opened the door, gesturing for her to precede him, as Isabelle walked back through the restaurant, past the diners who watched with undisguised curiosity, past Paolo who looked worried, past the coat check closet that had been her sanctuary for 4 months. She felt the weight of her carefully constructed invisibility falling away like shed skin. Her mother had spent 23 years running from this world, protecting Isabelle from its dangers and complications. And now, in one conversation, Isabelle had walked straight back into it. She just hoped she'd survive the experience.